August 31st, 2022. A quiet residential neighborhood in Nuevo León, Mexico. A family gathers outside an ordinary house. The parents and sister of 24-year-old Joanna, a preschool teacher who's just vanished without a trace. 3 days. That's how long it's been since anyone heard from her. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, she never showed up for work. For someone whose entire job depends on a strict schedule, that's not just unusual, it's completely unheard of. Her phone's been off the whole time. When her coworker finally realizes something seriously wrong, she calls the family. They try calling Joanna. They try calling her husband. Nothing. They drive to the house. The car that's usually parked outside, gone. The windows, dark. No answer when they knock. Every single door is locked. They call the mother-in-law, who owns the property, and she rushes over with a spare key. The lock turns. They step inside. You'd expect chaos in a moment like this. Signs of a struggle, a break-in, something out of place. Instead, the hallway is spotless. Nothing overturned, no broken glass. But there's one thing that hits them immediately. A strong chemical smell filling the entire house. Not a cleaning product, something else. Something that tells you instantly that whatever happened here can't be undone. If you're into true crime documentaries that dig deep into real, verified cases, you're exactly where you need to be. Drop a comment and let us know where you're watching from, and hit subscribe, because we cover true crime stories like this one every single week. Room by room, they search the house. Kitchen, living room, bathroom, all untouched. And then they reach the bedroom door. What they find inside leaves them only one option. Call emergency services immediately. Police arrive. The house is locked from the outside, with no sign of forced entry anywhere. Nothing valuable is missing. This wasn't a robbery. So who locked that door from the outside, took the car, and disappeared? And why did it take 3 full days before anyone even realized something was wrong? This is the story of Joanna Yarugi, a story that starts behind a locked front door, and ends up exposing a much bigger picture than anyone in that quiet neighborhood ever expected. Let's stick to the facts. To understand how this tragedy happened behind that locked door, we need to rewind and build the full picture from the start. Let's take a closer look at who Joanna really was. In August 2019, she graduated from Teachers College with honors, which already tells you something about the kind of person she was. Disciplined, organized, someone who held herself to high standards. Here's another detail worth noting. On March 8, 2021, Joanna publicly took part in online campaigns speaking out against violence toward women. She wasn't naive about the world around her. She understood the issues, and she wasn't afraid to speak up about them. Now let's bring in the second person in this story, a man named Jesus. He wasn't some stranger who suddenly appeared in her life. They grew up in the same neighborhood, just 5 blocks apart. What started as a teenage friendship slowly turned into something more. In criminal cases, there's a phrase that comes up constantly. We've known each other our whole lives. And more often than you'd think, that familiarity is exactly what makes people let their guard down completely. The warning signs had been there for a long time. Their relationship was anything but stable. At one point, they cut off contact entirely and didn't speak for over a year. It almost felt like life had handed them a clean exit. But eventually, they reconnected, and everything picked back up right where it left off. In April 2022, they got married. Their social media filled up fast with picture-perfect wedding photos, racking up hundreds of likes. To neighbors, to friends, to anyone scrolling past, they looked like a happy newlywed couple with everything ahead of them. But once you move past the curated online image and start looking at the actual documented facts, that picture falls apart fast. There was a serious imbalance in this relationship. Joanna was college educated and the only one financially supporting their household. Jesus had no steady job, no established career, no real income, and, maybe most significantly, he was struggling with a serious substance dependency, something only a small circle of relatives even knew about. So the obvious question, why would an independent, educated woman who'd publicly spoken out against abusive behavior marry someone dealing with active addiction and no income? One common explanation is what's sometimes called the rescuer mindset. The belief that love or commitment or making things official will finally be the thing that helps someone change. Now pay attention to the timeline here. They got married in April. Everything we just covered happened at the end of August. That's only 4 months, roughly 120 days of marriage. And through all of it, Joanna worked hard to keep the reality hidden from everyone around her. Nobody outside her closest circle had any idea that every single evening, after finishing a full day of work, this successful young teacher was coming home to a situation that had grown increasingly unpredictable. Jesus was completely financially dependent on his wife, and investigators have seen this pattern plenty of times before. When financial dependence combines with active substance use, it creates an extremely unstable environment inside a home. The couple kept up appearances as independent adults, all while living under the constant, close attention of relatives who'd known both of them since childhood. That attention only gave Joanna one more reason to keep the cracks in her marriage hidden. She didn't want to shatter the image everyone believed was real, so she chose silence. And that silence created exactly the conditions that would lead to what happened at the end of the summer. To reconstruct what led to that fatal outcome, we need to go back exactly 1 week from the evening Joanna's family opened that locked front door. It was late August. Jesus had just come back to the house after tension had already been building for a while. He'd recently completed another stay at a specialized rehabilitation center. Anyone familiar with addiction cases knows the first few days after leaving treatment are often the most unstable and the riskiest. A person in that state usually needs close supervision and a structured environment around them. That's not what happened here. Jesus was largely left on his own. Still no job. No real prospects of finding one anytime soon. The entire financial weight of the household stayed on Joanna, who kept showing up for her shifts every single day like nothing was wrong. Then, during those first few days back, something happened that shattered whatever trust remained between them. A significant amount of money vanished from Joanna's bank accounts. That changed the entire nature of their conflict. Supporting an unemployed spouse is one thing. Discovering that money you personally earned has been taken from your own accounts is something else entirely. Given Jesus's history, there was little doubt about where that money had likely gone. In a single moment, everything his recent rehab stay was supposed to accomplish looked like it had been completely undone. This is a pattern that shows up in case files again and again. The person being harmed keeps the problem hidden from everyone outside the home, right up until it's too late. That's exactly what happened here. Instead of freezing the accounts immediately, setting a hard boundary, or reaching out to relatives who lived only a few streets away, Joanna handled it entirely on her own. She kept going to work like normal. Her co-workers saw the same composed, reliable teacher they always had. Her parents had no reason to worry. The newlyweds had their own place and weren't asking anyone for help. Nobody knew that every evening, Joanna was walking back into a house where the man who'd taken her money was in the middle of a serious relapse. She decided to deal with it privately, on her own, without telling a soul. By the end of that weekend, the conflict had escalated fast. The missing money became the central issue between them. Joanna wanted answers. Jesus had no legal income and had backed himself into a corner through his own choices. Now he was being confronted directly about it. Cases involving serious dependency show a consistent pattern. In moments like these, rational conversation is often the first thing to disappear entirely. Instead of taking responsibility, the person often responds with anger, denial, and increasingly aggressive behavior. Inside that closed house, two completely different forces were colliding. On one side, Joanna's reasonable demand for answers and for her money back. On the other, uncontrolled rage. Then, Monday morning came. Joanna never showed up at the preschool. Her relatives and co-workers sent dozens of messages, called repeatedly. No answer. Jesus was gone too. From that point forward, the couple's digital trail went completely silent. Their phones stopped pinging nearby cell towers. Both of them effectively vanished from the network. The image of a stable marriage they'd carefully maintained for everyone around them finally collapsed completely. That was the beginning of the blackout that would eventually lead Joanna's family to that locked house 3 days later. Now, investigators had to piece together, evidence by evidence, exactly what happened after Joanna confronted her husband about the missing money, while the two of them were alone in that bedroom. The moment paramedics stepped out of the bedroom, the house came under full control of forensic investigators. Detectives didn't waste time chasing theories about mystery intruders. In cases like this, experienced investigators follow straightforward logic. Someone found inside their own home, the front door locked from the outside with the original key, windows untouched, and the legal spouse missing along with the family car. The primary person of interest becomes obvious almost immediately. The real challenge was something else entirely. Jesus already had a massive head start. During those 3 silent days, he'd had more than enough time to drive across state lines or disappear near the border entirely. So how do you track someone who's already had that much of a lead? That's where public awareness became one of the most powerful tools investigators had. Instead of sitting by the phone waiting on updates from detectives, Joanna's family made a smart, strategic move. They launched a large-scale campaign across social media and local community groups. One hashtag demanding justice, one photo of the fugitive, and it spread through the entire region at incredible speed. This wasn't just a plea for help, it became a virtual trap. Once thousands of ordinary people start sharing someone's face, staying invisible becomes almost impossible. Hard to stop for gas, buy food, or pull cash from an ATM when your face is showing up on countless phones throughout the area. Meanwhile, police split their resources. One team systematically interviewed neighbors, collecting statements from the same people who genuinely believed this couple had a happy marriage. They documented Jesus' recent return from rehab and the money that had disappeared from Joanna's accounts. A second technical team analyzed cell tower records and traffic camera footage, gradually reconstructing the route the missing vehicle had taken. Together, both efforts paid off exactly as investigators hoped. Just 48 hours after the house was entered, digital evidence and solid leads took investigators well beyond the city limits. The trail ended at a cheap roadside motel in a remote rural area, the kind of place people go when they're trying to stay off the radar. Cash payments, few questions asked at the front desk, minimal security in the parking lot. It looked like he was planning to wait things out until the intense part of the search died down. Law enforcement never gave him that chance. A tactical team moved in fast, entering the motel room before he had any opportunity to run. During the search, investigators found something that raised serious concern. Packages of illegal substances, along with a loaded firearm he had no legal authorization to possess. He wasn't just hiding. He was armed and prepared for things to escalate. Notice the careful legal strategy here. Police didn't immediately charge him with the most serious offense. Instead, he was taken into custody on charges of resisting law enforcement, illegal possession of controlled substances, and unlawful firearm possession. It was a smart procedural move. He was held securely, with no possibility of quick release, which gave forensic specialists and prosecutors exactly what they needed most: time. Time to examine every piece of evidence carefully and reconstruct, minute by minute, exactly what had happened inside that house. With the suspect behind bars on the possession charges, the specialized prosecution unit handling crimes against women gained the resource they needed most. Relying entirely on forensic findings, crime scene documentation, and the medical examiner's report, investigators were able to reconstruct the events inside that locked house, almost minute by minute. Back to that Sunday night, leading into Monday morning, when all communication went silent. Everything centers on the couple's bedroom, where the final stage of the confrontation played out. Joanna, worn down from hiding the problem for so long, demanded an explanation for the missing money. Inside that closed room, 2 people faced off, one demanding answers, the other cornered by the consequences of his own relapse. The injuries documented by forensic specialists make one thing painfully clear. There was no real conversation. The attacker turned to physical violence almost immediately. Investigators documented multiple blunt force injuries, concentrated mostly around Joanna's face and head. The man she'd known since childhood repeatedly assaulted her, inside their own bedroom, but it didn't end there. At some point, he armed himself with a bladed weapon. Forensic experts documented a deep, penetrating wound, the fatal injury, inflicted to the right side of her chest. What happened next is the part of this case that stopped me cold when I first read through the forensic findings. In a lot of investigations, moments like this get explained away as a sudden loss of control, a burst of rage followed by panic. But that's not what the evidence points to here. Investigators believe Jesus realized Joanna was unconscious and unable to defend herself. He didn't call for emergency help. He made no attempt to stop the bleeding or assist her in any way. Instead, according to the reconstruction, he made a calculated decision. He walked through the house and deliberately turned on the gas supply. Think about what that detail actually tells us. This wasn't framed by prosecutors as an impulsive act. It was presented as a calculated backup plan. If the wound itself didn't prove fatal, if her body somehow kept fighting to survive, then the toxic environment building inside a sealed house would leave almost no chance of recovery. At that point, investigators weren't looking at a case driven purely by anger anymore. The evidence pointed to a deliberate decision meant to eliminate any possibility of survival. After that, he calmly gathered his keys, walked out of the house, locked the front door behind him, got in the car, and drove toward that roadside motel. He left behind a house that would keep filling with toxic gas for the next 3 days. The official medical examiner's report, later presented in court, confirmed this entire reconstruction. Forensic pathologists determined that Joanna's death resulted from 2 primary findings: acute respiratory failure from the stab wound and severe carbon monoxide poisoning. According to investigators, the backup plan worked exactly as intended. At that point, the full sequence of events came together. Every piece of the puzzle, the empty parking space, the chemical smell in the hallway, finally had a clear, logical explanation. Now it was up to prosecutors to build a case that could withstand every challenge in court. Once the investigation shifted into full gear, Joanna's family entered what was arguably the most emotionally exhausting stage of the entire process. The suspect was already in custody, but the justice system required absolute precision. Joanna's family wasn't able to lay her to rest until 9 days after everything happened. 9 days of waiting. From the outside, a delay like that can look like nothing more than cold bureaucracy. But after years of covering cases like this, I've seen this misunderstood again and again. In reality, that unavoidable delay became one of the strongest foundations of the eventual conviction. Medical specialists and prosecutors carried out an exhaustive series of examinations, making sure the evidence file was airtight. Every injury, every lab finding, every measurable trace of toxic exposure documented to the highest legal standard. Preparing the case for trial took more than a year. Now let's jump ahead to November 2023. Inside the courtroom sits 27-year-old Jesus. Pay close attention to the prosecution's strategy here. Their case wasn't built solely on the fact that Joanna had lost her life. They pursued 2 of the most serious charges available under Mexican law: domestic violence and femicide. For prosecutors, it was essential to prove that his actions were driven by gender-based violence and carried out with exceptional cruelty, in direct violation of the trust that exists within a marriage. The evidence gathered during those 9 days proved decisive. The judge found him guilty on every count. The sentence was one of the harshest available: 45 years and 3 days in prison. Beyond that lengthy term, the court also imposed significant financial penalties: a fine of roughly $2,000, full reimbursement of Joanna's funeral costs, and financial compensation to her family. But there's one more detail in the verdict worth noting. The court didn't simply sentence him to prison. It also ordered continuous medical and psychological treatment for the full length of his sentence. In other words, the court formally recognized that he was dealing with serious behavioral and psychological issues, requiring ongoing supervision by specialists, even under maximum security conditions. At first glance, it might seem like that's where the story ends. The offender removed from society for nearly half a century, case closed, files archived. But once you start looking at the broader police records from that period, a much bigger picture starts to emerge. This wasn't an isolated case. During the first half of 2021, authorities in Nuevo León opened 25 criminal investigations involving similar offenses. During the same period in 2022, that number climbed to 37. That's a documented increase, not speculation, within a single state. By the time this verdict came down, Nuevo León officially ranked second in the country for cases like this. Only the state of Mexico reported more, with investigators opening 86 cases during the same period. Those numbers help explain the broader environment surrounding this case. Joanna was a woman with strong principles, trying to build an independent life for herself. Instead, she ended up facing a much larger problem affecting the entire region. Her family did everything they possibly could. They refused to let the fugitive disappear quietly. They brought the public into the search fast and helped close off every possible escape route. Investigators followed the evidence step by step and built a case that ultimately held up completely in court. Today, the records from this investigation remain publicly available, a reminder of one difficult truth. The feeling of safety can disappear the moment someone chooses to hide a destructive reality behind the locked front door of what looks, from the outside, like an ordinary home. What do you think? Could anyone around Joanna have seen the warning signs sooner, or was this silence simply too well hidden? Drop your thoughts in the comments, and if cases like this matter to you, make sure you're subscribed for the next true crime documentary.